and welcome to Goedt and Lecker. Today I'm going to be talking about Dutch tarts. We all have some nice associations with Dutch tarts. Maybe you were sitting in the forest with your friends and having a picnic and one of them brought a Dutch tart, or maybe you've been served a Dutch tart at someone's birthday or at a funeral or some other sort of event. I feel like they don't really need any introduction. They're popular around the world. But nobody really knows much about the origins of Dutch tarts, and I'm going to be trying to trace that today. I have a copy of this book from 1761 called the Volmaakte Hollands Keuken Meid. And that's a Dutch cookbook. It has a lot of interesting recipes, and among them it has a bunch of tart recipes that I'm going to be cooking today. So to start a tart, you need dough. Most cookbooks of the medieval and early modern periods don't actually give quantities. They just tell you, add a little bit of that, add a little bit of that. If you feel like it, add some of that. But in this case, we actually do have a recipe for the dough. It's not so much a recipe as it is a weight ratio. So the book says, for making dough for tarts, you must have 4 parts flour to every 1.5 part butter. So I have here 300 grams of butter, and I'm going to add to that 800 grams of flour. And that's 800 grams. Now this is an 18th century recipe, and in that time period they didn't have kitchen machines or mixers or anything like that. To make dough, they just use their hands and then they would roll it out. So that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to be making 3 types of tarts. One is a Asparagus tart, as it's called, an asparagus tart. Another one is a garnalen tart, that is a shrimp tart. And the last one is a melon tart, a Melon Taart. Okay, when it's all kruimelig like this, as the Dutch say, this is a fine consistency for our flour and butter mixture. At this point you might want to add a bit of salt and a bit of water. Not too much. Now if you want to add more water, you have to break it up again. Alright, I think this is a good consistency. I now have my 3 dough balls ready for the 3 pies that I'm going to be making, and now I'm going to take them and start making the pie bottoms. Now, there's such a high fat content in this that you really don't need to put any flour on the surface that you're going to be using to roll it out. You can just begin to roll. Now I want 1 circular pie and 1 square pie. Circular pie and 1 square rectangular pie. Now I want 1 rectangular pie and 1 circular pie. Vaguely rectangular. It doesn't have to be perfect. Nobody's perfect. Now this looks like a good candidate for my rectangular pie. Let me just rectangulize it some more. I'm now going to transfer this to the oven tray. And begin folding it. Now I want to make a kind of a box shape. This will only work if your tart is made of dough that's of the right consistency. It has to be pretty sturdy, pretty stable and load-bearing. And you don't want to make the walls too high. Okay, that's my rectangular pie. So the first pie, as I mentioned, will be an asparagus pie. I'm going to be using these white asparagus, or asperge as it's called in Dutch. These are very typical in the Netherlands and in Germany. They get a bit bigger than the green ones, and they're the same species, but they're grown in such a way that the stalks are covered with dirt as they're growing, so that light doesn't hit it, and then it does not photosynthesize, and it stays white. They're thought to have a more tender and pleasant taste than the green ones. However, the bottom parts of them need to be peeled. They're a bit rough, a bit woody, I would say. Alright, and here you can see why I had to make a rectangular pie. I'm going to layer the asparagus into the pie like this. Perfect. Aspergetaart maakt men uit getrokken koppen van asperges die men op de benedenkorst legt. Doet er allerhande fijne kruiden, gesmolten boter, notenmuskat en dooieren van eieren bij. Met wat citroen daarover geraspt. Okay, so they're saying that we need to put the asparagus into the pie, and then we have to add a bunch of other stuff. But chief among that is herbs. So I'm going to add some parsley, some dill, and this is a particularly Dutch herb that is called selderij. It's really just celery. It's the leaves of young celery. So it looks like this when you buy it in the shop. It's just really, really young celery. If you let it grow, it will become normal celery, but that's called the bleekselderij in Dutch, and has a different function in cooking. Alright, so here are my mixed herbs. The recipe doesn't specify which herbs to use, actually. It just says to add some herbs. And that's because at the time that these recipes were written, you didn't really have a consistent supply of herbs, and change from season to season, and also depending on where you were, so they just say to add some herbs. So that's what I did. These are the ones I happen to have on hand. I have my bowl of mixed chopped herbs for the asparagus tart, and a bit of parsley for the shrimp tart. So, now for the rest of the asparagus tart, the recipe calls for some egg yolks. I have 4 egg yolks here, one of them broke open. It asks for some nutmeg to be grated over it, into it. It's not a real Dutch recipe unless it has nutmeg in it. That was really what they were into back in the day. And the recipe also asks for some melted butter, which I have here. And the herbs to be mixed in. It wasn't enough egg yolks, I've added 2 more. Alright, that's going to be very fatty and rich. The recipe for the shrimp tart, taart van garnalen, says that die geschild zijnde doet men erbij gekapte peterselie, zout, peper, champignons, morels and boter. So, we have to add some mushrooms. And I have some mushrooms here. And these are called buikenzwam and bundelzwam. Now, the thing to remember about mushrooms is when you're carrying them around, you should always carry them around in a paper bag and not a plastic bag. Otherwise, they'll get this sort of slimy texture by the time you get them home. Always test them to see if they turn blue, to see if they're poisonous. You never know. They might be poisonous or psychedelic or God knows what. So be careful with mushrooms, kids. Alright, so I have my mushrooms. It also has to add some morels, or morels, or morillas, which were considered different from mushrooms, and also different from toadstools. Very spongy, nice soft texture. And I imagine it's going to taste absolutely bizarre, the mix of the shrimp taste and the mushroom and morel taste, but let's see. Now, when I was first conceiving of this recipe in my head, when I was reading it, I was thinking more of the typical shrimp you see in other countries. And then I remembered that in the Netherlands there are local shrimp. There are the Dutch shrimp. They live in the Waddenzee up north. In the Netherlands in ancient times, there used to be various Germanic tribes living here. And they were migratory, and they would live in different parts of the landscape throughout different seasons of the year. And in the summer they would go to the water, and in the winter they'd retreat to the land, and then escape the storms and the floods and so on. And this tradition has actually survived somewhat, and in the months of July and August especially, lots of Dutch people like to go up into the Waddenzee, and yeah, they like to catch these shrimp there, and families go up there on holiday, and they have little nets, and they put the nets in the water, and you just catch the shrimp just like that. And it's the most common form of child labor exploitation that I know, for the adults to make the children peel the shrimp, which is actually very difficult because they're absolutely tiny. I don't think I could do it with my large hands. So actually it is children's work. It is work that is meant for children to do. So these are different than normal shrimp. They have a different taste, and we're going to be combining them with the mushrooms today. This is an absolutely disgusting combination of textures. And the smell isn't very pleasant either, I have to say. It's really earthy and oceanic at the same time. It's like someone dredged the bottom of the ocean, maybe? The recipe also calls for parsley. Alright, we'll add a bit of salt and some pepper. And finally we're going to add some melted butter. Buttery, shrimpy, earthy smell that is really unlike anything I've ever smelled before in my life, and I can't say it's very pleasant actually. So now we're ready to fill the tarts. First I'm going to add a bit to the asparagus tart. Now I'm going to fill up the shrimp tart. And now I'm going to add a top to the shrimp tart. I'm now going to use some water to moisten the dough around the edges. This pie. I've decided to go against protocol and put a lid on the shrimp pie because I don't want the shrimp smell to escape the pie and leak into the oven and contaminate the rest of the pies. So I'll put a lid on the shrimp pie. Alright, so I have my two pies. They both look absolutely fantastic. I'm going to now start warming up the oven and I'll see what happens. I'm warming my oven to about 210 Dutch degrees. That's, I think, in standard degrees, something about 1,500 standard degrees, but you should double check that yourself. I'm going to leave the pies in for about, I don't know, half an hour. I have really no idea. I'll just see what happens. Pies are cooking. I'm going to be starting the dessert pie, which is a melon pie. And I have this melon here. It's yellow and quite small. I've sliced the melon into thin slices. I've made a little pie, and now I'm going to arrange the melon inside of the pie. I think that's not too bad. These look like they're getting close to being done. This one should be covered with a little bit of cinnamon. Okay. Likewise, a bit of sugar. Alright, it's been about 30 minutes. I'd say these are, they look like they're done. They look quite nice, actually. Trying the asparagus tart, and it's quite nice. Sort of a very rich quiche. The asparagus managed to cook in the oven somehow. The herbs give it a nice springtime flavor. And the dough, even though it's whole wheat, is pretty good. It's not too dry, it's buttery, it's nice. Alright, so I'm about to try this shrimp and mushroom and morel tart. It's pretty strange, but it's really good, actually. How can I describe this flavor combination? Very earthy. There's a lot of umami flavor going on. The shrimp coalesced together with the mushrooms in some way that is quite tasty. That I don't think I've tasted anything like this before in my life.
Yeah, actually the melon pie is by far the best pie. Really any pie I've probably never eaten in my life. I can't talk to you.